Cool. Yeah, they're nominees for directors. Right. Cool. Right.
It went really well, actually, Ed. We had some great questions. The questions you guys provided and stuff, they're fantastic. I think it's going to give a real insight.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I've been really enjoying my conversations with Alex. Alex has been kind enough and gracious enough to go through the mobile process calculi for programming the blockchain.
Well, just scratching the surface there, Greg. I feel like I have years to go before I can fully understand it. But I've put some thoughts on Slack actually about how we may want to proceed. So see if you can at some point.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. But no, I've been very humbled by having you attend to the work in this way. It's great. And this is in fact this is the kind of engagement that I think we're going to have with a lot of people sort of from the development community or developer community.
Well, Greg, my task for the next 2 weeks is to make sure that you have something which makes it easier for you. That's how I define my task is once I go through this painful process, I'm going to sit down and make it less painful for other people to the best of my ability.
That's great.
This is my pledge to you.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I mean, one of the things I regret is that developers don't have access to a certain core set of tools. In general, like there's been a lot of developments in logic and computing and mathematics that have all come together in the last 30 years that have really opened up the field, and it's really amazing to me that there are so many developers out there who could really benefit from the developments that have happened. And are just unaware that there's this explosion, this utter revolution going on in computing, and that explosion.
Can you name them?
Oh well, absolutely, absolutely. So one of the biggest shifts or changes has to do with the notion of proof itself. So the Curry-Howard isomorphism, or this idea that proof and program are somehow the same thing, and that proposition and type are somehow the same thing. This turns out to be such a profound idea. Like back in it was observed kind of in the 60s and 70s as this kind of funny thing for a really tiny area of a really tiny formal area of computing called the lambda calculus, right? And a really tiny sort of weirdo logic called intuitionistic logic. But it wasn't clear that it had much import to practical computing. But with the advent in the late 80s of linear logic, and linear logic provided this mechanism whereby you could use logic to reason about resources and concurrency. So linear logic. One of the interesting things in linear logic is that the conjunction, for example, like A and B, that gets exploded into two different conjunctions because the propositions are resources. They're not facts. So if you like, one of the talks I gave recently is two different conceptualizations of computing, and they're really weird in terms of the history of the way culture has discovered them. So you could think of a machine that takes information and facts and produces decisions. So what's a really good example of that kind of machine? That's the court system is an example of that kind of machine, right? So you have some kind of decision that needs to be made with respect to some person's behavior or some allocation of resources or something. Some decision needs to be made, and so various parties will present argumentation in terms of facts, and then the court will provide a decision. And in that setting, the idea, the conjunction of facts is quite, it's the more familiar notion of conjunction, right? So if you say it is raining and it is raining, but you conjoin the same fact with itself, well, you just get back the original fact. It's just that just boils down to it is raining. However, there's another kind of notion of machine that we're all familiar with, right? So we're familiar with cars, and we're familiar with the idea of putting petrol in the car, right? And it goes, and it goes for a while, and then you run out of petrol, right? So we know what it means for machines to but that didn't get formalized as a notion of compute for quite some time. So if you think about propositions in that setting, so maybe the simplest one in the case of Bitcoin is, I have a Bitcoin and I have a Bitcoin. So that notion of conjunction is a summation, right? It's not a multiplication. That are
what's your best root text?
It's done in the correct by construction paradigm. The whole thing is correct. And he says, okay, now we're going to move from that. We're going to redo this by making a small shift in the logic to intuitionistic linear logic. So he does that, and then he rederives the corresponding program terms, and then rederives the virtual machine. And again, it's correct by construction. And then finally says, okay, and now here's classical linear logic. Here's the new set of program terms, and here's a new execution mechanism. So he does it 3 times. You get to see the same process iterated 3 times and how it's correct by construction each time. So at the end of every step, you always end up with a virtual machine that is provably correct with respect to the logical system.
That's amazing. I'm also a little worried that we've lost everybody who's been listening.
No, but it's,
I mean, I don't pretend to understand the stuff that you guys are talking about, but I do have a couple of questions about how this is going to work. So you were just talking about how you have like resources, right? You have like a Bitcoin and a Bitcoin, and that's like a limited resource that is expent when you do something, right? Yeah. So if I understand correctly, the plan is to have our coin be a consumable resource that you basically put into the machine and you get compute out. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's exactly right.
All right. So people are going to be buying our coin for the purpose of doing computations with the network.
Let's be careful. I don't even think they're buying. I think what they're doing is they're redeeming amps, which were always targeted to run against the RChain, right?
I'm thinking about after the amp redemption.
So after the amp
redemption, the sort of main business of RChain.
Oh yes,
that's acquiring our coin for the purpose of putting them into the machine and getting computation out.
That's correct. That's exactly right. Yes. Yeah, and that's the necessity there is one of security, right? Because so again, what we've got is a blockchain, and we're storing the state of a virtual machine on the blockchain, right? And the reason is so we have this computer that you can't take down, right? It's a globally accessible computer that's running across as many nodes as are willing to participate in the internet. Right? And so you have this decentralized compute resource. And if you didn't have this economic security mechanism, people could ship programs to it that would essentially tie it up forever. Right? And you can do this either by creating single programs that don't terminate, or by creating lots and lots of programs, all of which keep it busy for quite a while. But if you put in a cost of compute and a cost of storage, right? So in other words, you monetize what the complexity of computation, then that means that the attackers have to pay for it, and so it becomes an economic security mechanism.
So if every time you put in our coin into the RChain compute machine, it's gone. Or what happens?
Right. That's a great question. So our coin is exchanged for phlogiston.
Phlogiston.
And phlogiston is the actual rate limiting stuff. And that's the thing that goes away. Right. So phlogiston is that's
basically gas.
That's gas in the Ethereum setting.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so the relationship of our coin to phlogiston is exactly the same as the relationship of ether to gas. So if you understand how ether works and its relationship to gas and the ether to gas schedule, if you have a feeling for that, then that's exactly the same as what's going on here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sweet.
So the coin doesn't go away then. Is that correct?
The coin doesn't go away. That's correct.
That is correct by construction in the case of RChain.
That's yeah. So the correct by construction bit is making sure that the Erlang contracting language and its corresponding type system and the virtual machine which executes the Erlang contracting language and all of the economic machinery all fits together in a particular way so that you can prove properties about it.
Yeah, I meant provably correct.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it is correct by construction, right? So
yeah,
when we use correct by construction methodologies, what that does is that eliminates a lot of our proof burdens. We get to shrink down the surface area of the things we have to prove. So let's give an example where the surface area could have been shrunken down but wasn't, right? So the EVM was independently developed from Solidity, right? The notions of compute are different. The structure is different, and so you have to provide a compiler from Solidity to EVM. And because the notions of compute are different, you have a proof obligation that the bytecode that the compiler generates is correct with respect to the semantics of Solidity. By the way, I've never seen the semantics of Solidity. To the best of my knowledge, it hasn't been written down. And correct with respect to the semantics of the EVM, as specified in the yellow paper. And if you don't have that, then someone can come along with an alternative compiler and inject bytecode that does all kinds of weird things, like shuffles your gas over to some other party, as an example. Right. So these are the kinds of security things that are guaranteed by the proofs of correctness. And if you have correct by construction, in other words, the structure of the VM formally derives in an automatic way from the structure of the core of Erlang, then you don't have to have that proof, because the proof is in the algorithm that generates the VM from the calculus. So we have lots of other things to cover. Ed, do you want to give an update on some of the organizational stuff?
Yeah, sure thing. Hi, everyone. Right, so Evan, Greg, and I have been working on the articles of incorporation. We're going to identify either 3, 5, or 7 initial directors, most likely 3 or 5. And I've put out names of those that I've recommended, nominated. And after that point, by the way, we'll add additional directors. Although the timing is not as urgent for doing that. And the initial directors will also approve the bylaws that Evan especially, but Greg and I have also been working on and contributing to. And the initial directors will, as I think their kind of first actions, approve the bylaws, appoint a president, appoint a secretary, and then other other roles can be approved over time as well. So certainly whoever is to manage the money, for example, is an important role to get clarified. So that's kind of, and Christian has been beginning to conduct interviews and has other schedules for the nominees for those director slots, which is awesome. Thank you, Christian. So that's the primary update. Greg or Evan, did I miss anything essential?
No, that's pretty good.
Well, the other thing that's I think important is the AMP redemption process itself. So I have a correction to make, which is that Adam will have the ERC 20 contract on testnet by tomorrow, not yesterday. So I misspoke on that, and then it goes live on Friday, so you'll be able to see on the Ether network the minted tokens by close of business Friday or early Saturday morning. And then fingers crossed, I'll go ahead and put the stake in the sand. Fingers crossed, we'll be ready to do the AMP redemption process by the 9th of January. So that's coming up very soon. And we have pretty much the drafts of, I think we're getting close to the final drafts on the terms and conditions. We have the work on burdening the scenario treasury completed. We have nearing completion. So certainly it's completed conceptually, and I believe that they're testing it now. We have the flow mapped out, so we should be able to demonstrate that this week for people to see, and we'll be making a video of what it takes in order to redeem AMPs per request of the community. So that's an update on the AMP redemption process. After the AMP redemption process, just so people understand, we will be burning whatever AMPs correspond to that which so we'll make sure that what's in treasury versus what's in circulation, the ratio of that of our coin in circulation to our coin in treasury matches AMP in treasury to AMP in circulation. We will maintain parity there.
So quick question, Greg.
Yeah.
So Dor, I think, just tweeted out or announced that the scenario team's planning on burning some additional AMPs in the near future. Would our coins be further burned if they do that?
We want to maintain parity for some period of time. And after the
what's the thinking behind that, Greg? I'm just curious. Why is that?
We only keep parity until the AMP redemption process is closed. After that, they're freely, because part of the aim here is to make sure that whoever moves over has exactly the same risk profile as they did before. All right, and then after that, after the AMP redemption process is closed, then we no longer need to have any sort of parity, right? The two projects are then
obviously okay. I understand.
Yeah, exactly. Another update is it turns out that there's probably going to be an acceleration on the listing of our coin on Polo. So I'll give more updates on that a little later this week or early next. But that process is underway as well. So people will be able to trade our coin. Again, the point is not, as Evan has emphasized at the top of this, speculation and trading is not the principal aim of our coin. But there are enough parties interested in exchanging our coin now that the process of getting it listed on the major exchanges is being accelerated.
Also a question, Greg. Why do you want to be listed on an exchange in an accelerated way?
I don't necessarily want to, but there are enough parties that are interested that I won't stand in the way.
Well, the reason why I'm asking, right, is because one thing that happened during the scenario time is when the last crowd sale was happening, the crowd sale price was above the exchange price. And it may actually be beneficial for clarity of the community and for the project to, you know, to do crowd sales as much as possible before the coin is actually liquid. There are reasons for that. There are obvious reasons for the opposite as well.
Yeah.
Because people want liquidity. But in some ways, you know, our experience at Coin Fund is that basically, like, the more you have these assets that are tradable and liquid while no deliveries are happening, the less beneficial it is for perception, because, you know, people look at absolutely random market moves and they make emotional decisions on things.
I am totally.
That's just not very cool.
No, I completely agree. There are other considerations that. So there are enough people that have come forward with their own desires with respect to listing on Polo that I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm not doing it myself. I'm not pursuing it, but I'm not going to.
Presumably something that the co-op would have some say in. And
you can't actually stop it. I can contact Polo right now and say, can you guys list our coin? You can't, like, anybody in the community.
I understand.
So 1,000 people can stand up tomorrow. You can blast it on scenario. I mean, there's so many ways to game that. I mean, you know.
No, really. Okay, fine. I understand.
Yeah, that's why. So it's largely about, you know, keeping people apprised of what's about to happen, as opposed.
Right.
I would also add to the only other project I know of that is big enough that did something of this nature is NXT to Ardor.
Yeah.
And they went straight to Polo. So they already had that lined up so that, you know, they had 3 months of lead time. They did the conversion, and then it was immediately traded, so, you know, the market can keep moving. But yeah.
The classic example is the Ethereum Classic split. That's like the real classic one. Even though that was not by way of design, it still happened, you know.
Yeah. So again, it's mostly Go ahead.
Sorry, Greg, but I've seen community members express their interest to buy RCoin A with Bitcoin. Couldn't Vulcanize sell it to them?
I mean, that's also possible. And again, the point is, it's not really in our hands. And I'm just trying to keep people aware that these processes are. I mean, I see this as a good thing. It's a good problem to have, right? Because there's so much demand for this already, and we haven't even minted the token. So I'm not. I don't think it's actually a real a serious problem. I don't believe that we want to be offering. Doing a coin offering anytime soon, because the capitalization of RChain Co-op and RChain Incubator is a different path. But people need to be apprised that it's quite likely that our coin gets listed on the major exchanges pretty quickly. So that's, you know, just again, this is a news function, not a not a decision.
It's also an Ether token, so it can be immediately listed on Ether Delta. So exactly. I mean, there's nothing It's really nothing. It's just it will.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, it will happen.
That's right. Exactly. So unless there are any other burning questions here, we want to move on to a couple of other things. I'd like to introduce, I've reached out to a graphic designer to help get the Hopefully she's still here. Are you here, Hannah? Oh, she might have left. Let me just double check. Anyway, I've reached out to Hannah Adams, who's a very, very talented graphic designer, to take all of the different proposals for the RChain logo and come up with something that takes the best elements from those. And I've done this in the spirit of asking for forgiveness rather than permission, because we desperately need a logo. We need it right away, and I'm just getting someone who's a pro at this to get it done.
Can I just say that I share the pain, because I've been working on my logo for the last 2 months, and I'm ready to rip my head off my shoulders.
Exactly. And I know Ed also went through a similar kind of process with LivelyGig. I really like the LivelyGig logo, but he brought in more team members, and the first thing they wanted to talk about this logo.
So just a comment on that, Greg, because I need the logo too for all the video stuff and all that. But the one thing I saw at Scenario was that I thought the whole idea was decentralization. So it's like anybody can create a logo.
In order to properly make this decision as a co-op, and so and a part of forming the co-op and getting it to the place where we have all the proper decision-making stuff in place, the logo is an instrument for that. So that's why I'm sort of cutting the Gordian knot and just getting this done. And the co-op can always go back and change the logo. That's fine. Yeah, that would be great. I saw that Hannah just messaged me, so let me just see if I can get her on. Hang on a second.
Yeah, it's funny too, because the graphic design, like any other thing, there's professionals. So there's a certain element when you're building something. It's like you want it to be the best it can, but art is always touchy because it's subjective. So, but still, I think there's definitely benefits to get a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hannah is remarkable. Did she just join? Was that? Oh no. Let's see. I'd like to give some technical updates. It looks like David Curran is on. Did I see you, DC? You wanna give an update on some of the stuff you've been working on? Because it's been a really interesting conversation there.
Sure, I can give an update. So yeah, I've been working on looking at a more detailed implementation for the storage layer in RChain, and let me just gather my thoughts here, because I've got a few other things going on in the background. Yeah, so I dug into the Ethereum J code base, just to kind of get a feel for how the storage layer is being implemented there. The level DB, the tree, RLP encoding, and how they're doing block and transaction storage and that kind of stuff, and came to the conclusion that there's really not a lot there's not a lot of overlap. RLP and the tree are pretty optimized for Ethereum and not all that appropriate for what we're looking to do, because of the semantics of the kind of special case style pattern, pattern queries. We need a completely different structure. So I've been trying to find a way or come up with some kind of graph which allows us to store the data in a way which is kind of representative of the style of query that we want to do. But got a little stuck on that, to be honest, and ended up having a conversation yesterday where I kind of came to the conclusion that I think there's going to have to be some kind of software control layer over the top of a graph structure which doesn't necessarily we're going to have to do some of the stuff in software, basically, in terms of pulling data in and storing it. But then I had a bit of a revelation last night, which I'm pretty excited about, and got a little bit of insight. And I think actually I'm going to work on it, more over this week. I've been thinking about maybe using typed nodes in the graph, which would allow us to do the kind of variable binding using some kind of type system in which is kind of where I'm at now. So I feel like I'm making progress, towards a kind of a more detailed view onto the the architecture, this kind of storage structure, and obviously, with a view to then moving on to proof of concept and implementation and that kind of stuff. But step one, I think, is coming up with a data structure which really suits our needs.
Sweet. No, I really appreciate that, and I've really enjoyed the conversations that we've had in regards to this. It's I was telling David that Mike Stay and I did some research in 2013, I think it was, around hashing and unification. So there was an effort to speed up unification. So unification is the basic mechanism by which keys are mapped to either values or continuations in special K. And this has the advantage that if you have already figured out how to flatten your keys so that you don't have variables in them, then it coincides exactly to this lookup of a key value database. Right, so it's up to you to tune your application, right? So, however, if you do avail yourself of putting variables in the keys, then it's the cost of the computation ramps up, and in fact, it ramps up on exactly the curve of data log, right? So, if you then avail yourself of not just unification but of some predicates, then the complexity of matching gets even steeper. But it matches it matches exactly what you expect from data retrieval and data log, which is fairly well known, well understood, and accepted within the industry. And in fact, it has undergone a resurgence, right, with Rich Hickey's Datomic and Logic Blocks offering as well. So there's good precedent for that kind of stuff. But Mike and I looked at to see if there had been any other work, and as near as I can tell, the effort kind of petered out in the mid 90s and then started picking back up in the mid 2000s. And so there are some algorithms which will give sort of 80% of unification as a kind of hashing mechanism, and so what Dave and I have been talking about is like, how much structure could you is it possible to design a data structure that's there's no control mechanism. Like if you look in the special K implementation, what I do is I do a compilation down to the Mongo query language that calculates from the term all the paths down to the leaves, and then from those paths you can calculate a Mongo query that will get you that will filter out most of the keys, but there will be some false positives, and then you pull in all the ones that match, and then you just filter out the false positives by actually running unification. So it's a little bit inefficient, but it's not terrible. It would be ideal if you could get the entire semantics of unification down into the data structure at the store level, because then the thing would scream. But
Yes.
yeah, but so far we don't don't have a mechanism that doesn't. I mean, you know, maybe David has an insight that that we'll be looking forward to reading about.
I'm quite excited, actually. I haven't had any time to think about it any more deeply this morning, but
Then great. This is exciting. Very, very good. So that's update on the storage layer. Haven't touched base with Matthew DiFerrante on the from Rolang down to the bytecode, but I have done work on the bytecode itself. So I checked in a branch on the Rovium, on the Rosette repo under RChain. That has now a draft of the of a BNFC representation of the bytecodes. This is still very much work in progress. The bytecodes don't have their arguments yet. So if you look at that, you're only seeing just one representation. So there'll ultimately be 3 representations. One will be a kind of more detailed representation that's more humanly readable. So when you look at the instructions, you can kind of see what the instruction is and what the arguments for the instruction are. The other one will be numeric based, which is not to be utilized really for serialization and deserialization, except as the in-memory representation. The wire or storage will be binary, but then we need some in-memory thing that will map to the binary, and that's what that one is for. And that's the one that's checked in the repo, but so you can check that out. So we're making very good progress on the technical front. Let's see, is there anything else that we wanted updates on? Ed, anybody?
I had a little visualization of the attention economy working as smart contracts. Is that interesting?
Yeah, let's take a look.
It's pretty quick, and we'll need some discussion on it. Hold on, let me find the right place to show. That's weird. Like I said, I just have to share the screen. So yeah, this is far from complete. Let's see, minimize that guy. So the idea is that Alice, Bo, and I put just a large group, but this is, you know, a number of other people just to show, and there are structural relationships between these, as there would be in the agent service kind of model.
Well, if you went ABC, it would be Alice, Bo, and community.
I know community would be better even. Yes, exactly. So let's pretend they all have 100 tokens as their initial balance. And then Alice creates a post to Bo. At this point, the protocol will collect something. Actually, you know, every one of the transactions will collect something, but I'm just going to show you an example in the posts. So then Alice's balance will go down to 99. And then maybe Alice wants to amplify the post and put 10 additional tokens so that the post has further reach and make sure that Bo will see it, for example. Bo could attend to the post or tip the post. Either one's about the same, which increases the balance on the post. The post is also its own smart contract, so it can have a balance and do things on its own, right? And then let's say that Bo forwards the post and that costs an additional token that reduces Bo's balance and increases the protocol's balance. The protocol's basically, you can equate it to a node operator essentially, but it's the network more generally. And then let's say that reaches you know, a large group of 100 and they each tip the post or attend to the post. So maybe the rule in the smart contract is the Bo's post keeps 50 of it and then forwards back another 50 back to the original post. And so the balance of the original post is now 61. And then Alice can cash out that post of 61 and adding to her own balance, and Bo could do the same. And this is just an example how the tokens can flow through the system. This is not describing how reputation and scoring works, but this kind of talks to why it's important that each one of these things be their own full smart contract, and can there's so many ways that this can be tuned when these are smart contracts. All these kind of parameters and costs and other things can all be adjusted, and this only works, through microtransactions and through a scalable blockchain technology. So this is, I think, a better visualization than the attention economy's had thus far.
I tend to agree. It also helps us, investigate and raise interesting questions like, does Alice always have to spend tokens in order to post?
Right.
I think that's an interesting question, and I think that's it's a really useful one, because right now the perception of free transmission of information is what's creating this ballooning of data centers that are spewing out heat. So this is actually there's something elegant and responsible.
Well, can I make a comment though, Greg? Because I think it's an important one, even though it really doesn't change the gist of the issue. Can we come up with a better term than smart contract? Because we clearly are not talking about any sort of contract. We're talking about a mobile process subject to consensus or something like that.
I agree. The smart contract language is more confusing than informative.
It really will confuse people, because I'm constantly thinking about how is it that we communicate this better, and I think one mistake that's kind of easy to make is to use existing terminology that doesn't really reflect the kind of thinking that is being put into this new type of notion. So the drawing that Ed just made makes it clear that all of these bubbles are not contracts. They are processes in a pi calculus sense. But to communicate to people, we should basically call them that or something like that.
Well, so I think language engineering is fascinating. I agree with you that they are not smart contracts. I attempted to create language around this. I call them social contracts, because in some sense, what's intriguing about the pi calculus and that family of models of computation is that they're the first models of computation where computation is a social phenomena, right? Computations socialize with each other. They exchange information, and that's how work gets done. That's how compute gets done. So in that sense, and then there's this play on the original notion of social contract that was an intentional pun. I think if we begin with the language pi calculus or mobile process, we won't make contact with the people that we want to make contact with in the crypto space. So what
I'm certainly not saying that mobile process is a great name. I'm just, I don't like either smart contract or social contract, because, like, for example, being an object-oriented programmer historically, I would tend to think of these as slightly more like objects, even though, of course, they're not. But they have a way for you to kind of communicate with them by sending them resources and by sending them messages. And I think it's very often okay to create new language for a new concept. It's just that you have to be prepared to, educate your community about what that language really means.
Yeah, and so the solution that I would prefer is to go meta, which is to have these kinds of conversations at the community level. Like, so make people aware that there is a contact between what we're describing and smart contracts as conceived by Ethereum, but that there was in fact an earlier notion of contract, internet scale smart contract, and that was the very first system that where this was really realized was the BizTalk system for Microsoft, and there we utilized the language of contract. In fact, I have a paper in the Association of Computing Machinery on exactly this, types and contracts. I wrote that with Steve Bjork. So I would rather have a discussion about the language as a part of these kinds of community hangouts, and then let the terminology that sticks organically grow. Like, for example, I didn't name Rolang. I just wrote up the spec, and then Jack and other developers who were kind of investigating it, because it came from the row calculus, just started calling it Rolang, and that stuck. Like, it was easy to say. It sounded a little bit like Golang, and the naming process was completely organic. And that would be my preference in terms of these things, is to let the naming process be organic. So I register your dissatisfaction with smart contract. I register the dissatisfaction with social contract. What's something that sticks, right? That's what we're looking for.
These are also.
In order to do that, we'll have to experiment.
So the first is the thing that's likely to stick is going to be the thing that people have already been exposed to. And the thing that people have already been exposed to is smart contract on a whole lot of other platforms. And it is likely that if we don't make an affirmative effort, as the initial inventor or discoverer of something traditionally names the thing, and that name will stick just because that's what everyone's going to refer to it by.
Yeah, unless.
But social contract is, in a sense, much more accurate as Greg describes it, and it has had a lot of appeal. I think it attracted a lot of people to Scenario, a social contracting system. What isn't represented there is that it's also a process orchestration system, a process automation system, and that's the other side of it. And maybe we need it's social contracting and something.
Yeah, these are also agents, or that it's a process that's running too, and smart contract doesn't have so much that notion.
If we're going to be aware that smart contract is an imprecise term, it's worth also bearing in mind that describing RChain just as a blockchain is also pretty imprecise, because people's conception of what a blockchain is. RChain is so much more than what a lot of people perceive to be a blockchain.
It really is. The other thing that's really interesting is that this has been tried multiple times. Does anyone here? I'm really dating myself now. Does anybody here remember Telescript and General Magic? Yeah.
Was that before I was born, Greg?
What's that?
Was that before I was born?
Probably. Back in the early '90s, there was a company called General Magic that wrote a mobile programming language called Telescript that was aimed at doing many of the things that smart contracts are doing, and many of the things that Rolang and RChain are doing. They just didn't have a blockchain, which made it much, much, much harder. And they were just way too far ahead of their time. But it's quite possible to steal some of their language, right? Telescript is an interesting idea, and it's perfectly reasonable to think about co-opting or stealing language from there or from other domains as well. So
again, it's the same discussion, I feel, as the logo. The company itself, the papers you publish will have to have certain terminology, but then people are going to describe it in any way. The smart contract, social contract, process orchestration goes on and on and on and on. So there needs to be concrete language, and that needs to be decided by a company or the authors of the paper, Greg, yourself, whoever, Jack Peterson, whoever else is helping you. And then again, it's just going to go just completely out the window, and it will be smashed to bits to, so.
I tend to agree. Actually, along those lines, Ed and I had a really, really good conversation yesterday about a community model for languaging and announcements and things like that. So what Ed and I were kicking around was this idea of that particular parties or communities would own particular channels. So as an example, I've put like 2 years of my life into developing this channel, and I did it on purpose because I knew I couldn't maintain or manage a whole bunch of channels. And I wanted to have a two-way channel with the community so that anyone could come and talk to me and ask questions. And so I could in some way lay claim to ownership of this channel in a certain way, right? And the main thing then is just, whatever my sensibilities are with respect to this channel, that would be the judgments that would go into that would be the sensibility that governs the content that's okay on this channel. And then maybe the co-op has a particular channel that it feels it has ownership on, and it would have the final say as to what goes into that channel. And I don't know, Coin Interview has its channel, or RChain Community has its channel. And the idea is that the decisions and sensibilities about the channel go with the organization that has ownership, and ownership is basically defined by engagement, right? The party that sort of had the persistence and tenacity to engage over the long haul, that's what constitutes ownership, and that then describes the sensibility for the final say in the content of the channel. And in this way, we can get around some of the issues of centralization of message. Does that make sense? Maybe I didn't describe that well.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Cool.
It does, Greg, except for the part that we'll have to clone you 3 or 4 ways in order for you to have enough time to do it.
I have to jump off. Let me check one more time. There's a dev stand up in right now, but let me just see one more time if Hannah is there. Okay, so apparently she's having trouble with Zoom. But hopefully I can introduce her next week, introduce her to the community, and hopefully she'll be on Slack as well. Please, feel free to continue the conversation, but I'm going to jump over to the dev stand-up. Again, please, give some thought to, I have this notion that we can make the dev stand-ups more open, but just if we observe the protocol that, if you don't have the commit bit, just, keep quiet. You can listen, but don't speak.
I'm going to jump off also. And so, Greg, just look over my comments on Slack, and we'll be in touch and contact. And thank you, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you. Talk to you guys soon.